Chapter 12. Things get weirder. I didn't think it was all that weird when Stacy Benoit called me Saturday morning to see how I was doing. After all, she's my friend, and she did think I had fainted in school the day before. I didn't realize when I laughed and told her there wasn't anything wrong with me that I was only confirming her worst fears. I didn't figure that out until Monday morning, when our class turned into something from the Twilight Zone. Until that point, I had other things to worry about, like what to do about Miss Schwartz. Since my mother still wouldn't let me out of the house, I spent a long time discussing this force field thing with Peter over the phone. He told me he was pretty sure Miss Schwartz was actually safer inside that thing than she would be walking the streets. She probably doesn't like it in there, he said. I know I wouldn't. But there's nothing going to hurt her. Well, she doesn't have to eat or go to the bathroom or something? I asked nervously. I could almost see Peter shrug over the telephone line. I don't think so, he said. I have the feeling time is pretty much holding still inside that thing. So unless she had to go to the bathroom when he put her in there, she's probably fine. He paused, then added, Come to think of it, that force field could be a woman's dream. She won't age a bit. Don't be a male chauvinist piglet, I said angrily. This is serious. I know it's serious, snapped Peter, but we can't do anything about it this weekend, unless you know of a time when we can be sure that Broxholm won't be there. I suppose you're right, I said, but the thought of Miss Schwartz trapped in that force field gnawed away at me for all the rest of the day, and all of Sunday too. I had to get her out of there. I was still stewing about that on Monday, until things got so weird that I forgot about Miss Schwartz for a while. It started with Duncan Dougal, who walked into class carrying the biggest apple I had ever seen in my life. Good morning, Mr. Smith, he said. How are you today? His voice was so syrupy sweet, it made me want to throw up. I looked away, then looked back again so fast it put a crick in my neck. Duncan? I thought, in astonishment. The class bully put his apple on Mr. Smith's desk, then went to his own desk, sat down, and folded his hands neatly in front of him. I squeezed my eyes shut and then opened them again to see if anything would change. But the apple was still there, and Duncan was still sitting at his desk, smiling like a little angel. What was going on here? When I opened my desk, I found a note that said, I think you are the bravest person I have ever met. It was signed, a friend. Who had it come from, and why? I looked around the room, but the others were all bent over their desk, working busily away. I turned back to my work, trying to figure out what was going on. But even the weird stuff that had happened so far hadn't prepared me for what came next. You pig-faced baboon, yelled a familiar voice. Stacy? Stacy Benoit? The girl most likely to be declared a saint while still living? I turned around and saw Stacy standing beside her desk, shouting at Mike Ferran, the only kid I had ever heard of who had never, and I mean never, gotten in trouble with a teacher. Shut up, yelled Mike. Shut up, you creep. When Stacy slapped him across the face, I almost fell out of my chair. Of course, Stacy couldn't slap that well, having never done it before, so it was kind of a wimpy little slap. But this was Stacy Benoit, for heaven's sakes. Stacy, yelled Mr. Smith, who was sitting at the back of the room with a reading group. Michael, what is going on up there? He started for the front of the room, but he was too late. When Stacy slapped Mike, he jumped up so fast he knocked his desk over. His face was red. I didn't realize until later it was from stage fright. You mother wears, your mother wears... I wanted to prompt him. It was pathetic to see the nicest kid in class try to come up with a withering insult, and even more pathetic when he finally finished up with, your mother wears polyester. But it seemed to do the trick. Stacy began to shriek in outrage. Mr. Smith reached them just in time to keep them from going for each other's throats. The rest of you stay in your seats, he ordered. I'll be back in a minute. Then he walked out the door, dragging the two best-behaved kids in the 6th grade along with him. They were kicking and screaming every step of the way. I closed my eyes and shook my head. I wasn't sure I was awake. So what was going on? Was this the same planet I had gone to sleep on? I couldn't wait for recess so I could talk to Peter. Chapter 13, Rumors. Stacy and Mike did a good job, didn't they? Said Peter when we got together on the playground at recess. What are you talking about? I asked. Stacy and Mike, didn't you think that fight they put on was pretty good? The fight they put on, I echoed. Peter sounded impatient. Stacy and Mike are afraid Broxholm will decide one of them is the best kid in class, and then try to kidnap whichever one he chooses. So they decided to fake a little fight, mess up their reputations a little. All of a sudden, everything came clear. That's why Duncan brought Mr. Smith an apple this morning, I said. Peter giggled. Pathetic, isn't it? But it might work. Right now, Duncan is a sure pick for the worst kid in class. But if he works really hard, he might actually manage to pull himself off the bottom of the list. Since he knows that no matter what he does, he's never going to push himself into the most average category. If he can improve at all, he's probably safe. The problem is, he's been so bad all year that it's going to take a major effort to get out of that bottom spot. Peter paused, then added, I intend to have some fun with him over the next 3 days. 3 days? That was all the time we had before Broxholm was scheduled to kidnap 5 of us into space. That's not very nice, I started to say. But then I remembered the way Duncan had tormented Peter for the last 6 years. I decided I couldn't blame Peter if he wanted to get a little of his own back while he could. Any decision to be a nice guy about this was going to have to come from inside himself. I decided to change the subject. Tell me, I said, just how did they know about all this? I told them, said Peter. And they believed you? Actually, it made sense. If they were going to believe anyone, it would be Peter. He had a reputation as being the most honest kid in class, which was one of his problems. He didn't know how to tell people the kind of little white lies that keep people from getting mad at you. But I doubted that even his reputation for honesty would convince people this story was true. Peter smiled. Actually, you're the reason anyone believed me. It started with Stacy. She just didn't believe you had really fainted, or that if you had, you would have tried to grab the teacher's ear on the way down. So she knew something was going on. Later, she cornered me on the playground and demanded to know what you were up to. Why you? I asked. Peter blushed. You're going to hate this, he said. There's a rumor going around that you're my girlfriend because we've been spending so much time talking on the playground. Yuck! I yelled. Yuck, yuck, yuck! Suddenly, I realized what I had just done. Don't take that personally, I said. I won't, said Peter, since I feel the same way. Hey, I thought, what do you mean you feel the same way? But we didn't have time to work that out right now. Anyway, said Peter, Stacy was convinced I must know what was going on, and since I did, I told her. The whole story? I gasped. Peter nodded. She didn't believe me at first, of course, but when she talked to you on Sunday and you told her there was nothing actually wrong with you, she figured it must be true. He laughed. That was all it took. By Saturday afternoon, the phone lines were humming all over Kinnatuck Falls. How come you know all of this? I asked. How come no one asked me? Peter shrugged. That's not the way rumors work. People never check with the source. They always ask someone else. Don't ask me why, but it's true. Lots of stupid things are true. Anyway, Stacy told Mike, and Mike told someone else, and that was it. That's the kind of story that travels fast. And they all believe it? I asked. Peter shook his head. I don't think so. At least not yet. Except for Duncan. He's so dim he'll believe anything, especially if Stacy and Mike believe it. He thinks they know everything. That's why he hates them so much. I see, I said, though some of this was coming a little too fast for me. Well, do you suppose if enough of us start to believe it, the adults will pay any attention to us? Peter looked as if I had just suggested Mickey Mouse was likely to be the next president of the United States. Get real, Susan, he said. They'll just say it's another crazy kid rumor. Do you remember last year when half the people in the school were convinced that the president was coming to Kennetech Falls to make a speech? I nodded. I had almost believed it myself. Half because so many of my friends did. Half because I wanted it to be true. I also remember how my father had laughed when he heard about it. Just because 1,000 idiots believe something, that doesn't make it true, he had said. Which was true, I guess. But it certainly didn't help us now. That was when Peter decided to complicate things with a new problem. What are you going to do about this yourself, he asked. What do you mean? Well, since one of the things on Broxholm's shopping list is the best kid in class, if we can't unmask him, you've got a good chance of being picked yourself. That was the best laugh I'd had in days. You're nuts, I said. There's no way I could be picked for the top kid in the class. There is too. It all depends on how he's making his choice. The way I see it, there are 4 of us that might be considered best in the class. Stacy, Michael, you, and me. You're nuts, I said again. Listen to me. Stacy and Michael are your basic, perfect students. But they just did a good job of taking themselves out of the running. Though, to tell you the truth, I don't think Broxholm would have chosen either of them anyway. They're real bright, but they don't think that much. They believe everything the teacher tells them. I'm sure Broxholm is bright enough to know that doesn't make a great student. He paused. Then there's me, he said. I'm real bright, but I'm not motivated, and I'm not very social. You know how it goes. Peter is a good student, he's just not very well-rounded. I hear it every year. That leaves you, Susan. You get good grades, you get along with everyone, you're in all kinds of activities. Let's face it, you may not be the best in any one thing, but when you look at everything together, you make a pretty good pick for the top of the class. I stared at him in horror. You're not kidding, are you? He shook his head.